My mother looked me dead in the eye across the white tablecloth and said, "Your sister's wedding is the family priority, so we cannot attend yours." I did not scream or cry like I used to when I was younger. I simply smiled, nodded, and said that is perfectly fine. Then I paid the $1,500 dinner bill and walked out into the Atlanta night. What my family did not know as they sat there celebrating my sister and her allegedly wealthy fiance was that my quiet little wedding was taking place at my private $10 million villa in Tuscany, and they had just uninvited themselves from the event of the decade. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your peace. My name is Kendra, and I am 35 years old. The scent of dry, aged ribeye and expensive truffles filled the private dining room at Chop's Lobster Bar, one of Atlanta's most exclusive steakhouses. We were supposed to be celebrating my parents Brenda and Thomas and their 40th wedding anniversary. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the heavy oak table, but the atmosphere was anything but warm. I sat next to my fiance Julian, feeling the familiar weight of my family's unspoken hierarchy pressing down on my shoulders. Julian squeezed my hand under the table, his steady presence the only thing keeping me grounded. He was a brilliant corporate attorney, sharp and observant, and he saw right through the polished facade my family worked so hard to maintain. Across from us sat my younger sister Chloe. At 30 years old, she was a lifestyle influencer whose entire brand was built on the allowance our parents still secretly funneled into her bank account. Beside her sat Preston, her fiance. Preston came from what my parents enthusiastically called old money. He was white, wore loafers without socks, and carried an air of unearned superiority that made my teeth grind. My parents worshipped the ground he walked on. To Brenda and Thomas, Preston was not just a future son-in-law. He was a golden ticket to the country club elite, a validation of their lifelong obsession with social climbing and proximity to perceived high society. They spent the first hour of dinner fawning over his family's vintage car collection, while completely ignoring the fact that Julian had just made junior partner at his prestigious law firm. The disparity in how my parents treated us was obvious, even in the gifts we brought tonight. Earlier that evening, Julian and I had presented my parents with an all-expenses-paid trip to a luxury resort in the Maldives. My mother had barely glanced at the travel voucher before sliding it into her designer purse, offering a tight-lipped thank you. Chloe, on the other hand, had gifted them a framed collage of her own engagement photos, and my parents had reacted as if she had handed them a priceless work of art, passing it around the table with tears in their eyes. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth and focused on the future. I had spent the last 10 years building my own international luxury hospitality firm from the ground up, completely independent of my family. I did not need their validation anymore. I just wanted a peaceful night to share our good news. I took a deep breath and picked up my champagne flute. Julian and I had been engaged for 6 months, and we had intentionally kept our planning under wraps. We wanted our wedding to be a celebration of our love, not another battleground for my mother's constant micromanagement. But tonight felt like the right time to finally share our joy. I tapped my knife against the crystal glass, letting the soft chime cut through my father's booming laughter. Everyone turned to look at me. I smiled, looking at Julian before turning back to my parents. Julian and I finally set a date. I announced, my voice steady and clear. We are getting married the first weekend of September. We are keeping it small and intimate, but we would be honored to have you all there. The words had barely left my mouth when the sharp crack of glass hitting wood shattered the quiet elegance of the room. Chloe had slammed her champagne flute down onto the table with such force that golden liquid spilled over the rim and stained the pristine white tablecloth. Her eyes were wide with manufactured outrage. She tossed her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder and let out a dramatic gasp that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. "Are you kidding me right now, Kendra?" She snapped, her voice loud enough to make the waiter freeze in the corner. "You cannot get married the first weekend of September. Preston and I just finalized our date this morning, and we are getting married that exact same weekend." The table descended into stunned silence. I stared at my sister, trying to process the sheer audacity of her statement. We had just announced our date. Chloe had not said a single word about her wedding timeline until the exact second I opened my mouth. It was a calculated hijacking, a desperate move to ensure the spotlight remained permanently fixed on her. Preston leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms and letting out a condescending chuckle. "Come on, Kendra," he said, shaking his head as if I were a confused child. "You know how big our wedding is going to be. My family is booking the entire Atlanta Botanical Garden. You cannot seriously expect people to split their time between a major society event and whatever small thing you and Julian are putting together. It just does not make logistical sense." I waited for my parents to intervene. I waited for my father to tell Preston to watch his tone, or for my mother to remind Chloe that I was the older sister and had been engaged far longer. I waited for any sign that the family I shared blood with would protect my moment. Instead, my mother Brenda slowly wiped her mouth with her linen napkin and turned her head toward me. Her eyes were hard, devoid of any maternal warmth. She did not look at me with pride or happiness. She looked at me with a sharp, expectant glare, an expression I had memorized over 35 years of being pushed to the back of the line. She looked at me as if I had just committed an unforgivable crime by daring to take up space in Chloe's world. Growing up in our affluent neighborhood, I was always the reliable workhorse, while Chloe was the show pony. I was the one who quietly built a career while Chloe threw tantrums until my parents bought her the right designer clothes to fit in with her wealthy friends. My mother always said Chloe needed more support because she was sensitive, but sensitivity had nothing to do with it. Chloe was ruthless, and my parents were her willing enforcers. Now, sitting in this extravagant restaurant, I felt the familiar walls of my childhood closing in. Julian shifted next to me, his jaw tightening as he prepared to defend me. I placed a gentle hand on his knee, stopping him. I needed to see exactly how far my family was willing to go. The silence stretched thick and suffocating as the waiter awkwardly cleared the appetizer plates and practically sprinted away. I looked directly at my mother, waiting for her judgment. My mother did not blink. She reached for her crystal water glass, took a slow, calculated sip, and set it back down on the coaster with a dull thud. "Kendra, you need to change your date," she said. Her voice carried no apology or hesitation. It was a directive issued from a manager to a subordinate. "Preston's family has already secured the Atlanta Botanical Garden. Your sister's wedding is the family's priority. We cannot come to yours." The words hung in the air, cold and absolute. I felt Julian shift violently beside me, his protective instinct flaring. I pressed my knee against his beneath the heavy linen tablecloth, a silent plea to let me handle this. My father Thomas finally spoke up, leaning forward and nodding in enthusiastic agreement with my mother. "Now, Kendra, be reasonable," he said, gesturing with his silver steak knife. "You and Julian are just doing something quiet, right? A courthouse thing or a little backyard gathering with your friends. Chloe is marrying into the Spencer family. This is a high society event. We have appearances to keep up with his parents. You need to step aside for this one. It is the right thing to do for the family." The sheer disrespect was breathtaking. Just doing something quiet. They had not even asked me what my plans were. They had not asked about a venue, a dress, a caterer, or a guest list. They simply assumed that because I was the one getting married, my event was inherently inferior to whatever Chloe was doing. To them, I was still the invisible workhorse, and Chloe was the prize. This was not a new dynamic. It was the exact same script they had been reading from my entire life. When I won the state science fair in high school, they skipped the award ceremony because Chloe had a minor role in a local theater production. When I graduated at the top of my university class with my business degree, my father complained about the drive, and they left the commencement early because Chloe had a hair appointment for her birthday party. When I launched my first boutique hotel, they sent a generic card, but when Chloe gained 10,000 followers on social media, they threw a catered dinner party at the house. Now I was a self-made millionaire running a global luxury hospitality firm, and they still looked at me like I was a supporting character in Chloe's glittering life. Preston chuckled, swirling the amber bourbon in his glass. Come on, Kendra, do not make this harder than it has to be. The botanical garden is not cheap. My parents put down a $50,000 deposit just to secure the date. You cannot expect us to move that around for a small-scale shindig. Let Chloe have her moment. A small-scale shindig. I thought about the centuries-old frescoes painted on the ceiling of my master suite in Tuscany. I thought about the private vineyard, the Michelin-starred catering team I had flown in from Paris, and the string quartet I had booked from the Milan Conservatory. I thought about the $10 million deed sitting in my hidden wall safe back at my penthouse with my name printed clearly on the heavy paper. Chloe pouted, pushing her bottom lip out in a display of weaponized innocence. I really did not mean to double book you, Kendra, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. But Preston and I have so many important people to accommodate. Brand sponsors, local politicians, his parents' country club friends. It is going to be the wedding of the season. You can just push yours to October or maybe next spring. Julian will not mind, right? She looked at Julian, expecting him to bow down to her logic. Julian stared back at her with a coldness that could freeze water. Julian deals with hostile corporate takeovers for a living, and he recognized a power play when he saw one. Julian does mind, he said, his voice dangerously low and steady. But Kendra and I make our own decisions about our future. My mother shot Julian a warning look before turning her attention back to me. Her posture was rigid, her jaw set. We are not discussing this further, Kendra. You are changing your date. I will not have this family split on such an important weekend, and I certainly will not have Preston's family thinking we are disorganized or divided. You have always been the tough one. You do not need the pomp and circumstance. Chloe does. You have always been the tough one. The universal family translation for we are going to neglect you because you are strong enough to survive it. For years that phrase had been a heavy chain around my neck. It was the excuse they used to drain my emotional reserves while pouring everything they had into my sister. They used my independence as a weapon against me, penalizing me for not needing their financial support, while rewarding Chloe for her constant helpless demands. A waiter appeared, completely oblivious to the radioactive tension at the table. He cheerfully served the dry-aged steaks and roasted asparagus, arranging the plates with practiced precision. My father immediately picked up his fork, diving into his meal as if the matter was entirely settled. My mother smoothed her napkin over her lap, her face a mask of serene victory. I looked around the table. I saw my father chewing his steak, eager to move past the awkwardness and pretend we were a perfect family. I saw Preston checking his phone, completely unbothered by the emotional wreckage he and his fiance had just caused. I saw Chloe practically vibrating with glee, her status as the supreme daughter reaffirmed once again. And I saw my mother staring at me from across the table. I looked at their smug faces. They were waiting for the explosion. They were bracing for the reaction I used to give them when I was a teenager. They expected me to argue, to cry, to demand fairness in a system that was rigged against me from birth. They wanted me to beg for their attendance so they could enjoy the power trip of denying me. They wanted a chaotic scene so they could call me bitter and jealous, cementing Chloe's position as the innocent victim who was just trying to plan her special day. They wanted me to fight for a place in a family that had already locked the door from the inside. I looked at their smug faces, waiting for the explosion. They were bracing for the reaction I used to give them when I was a teenager. They expected me to argue, to cry, to demand fairness in a system that was rigged against me from birth. They wanted me to beg for their attendance so they could enjoy the power trip of denying me. They wanted a chaotic scene so they could call me bitter and jealous, cementing Chloe's position as the innocent victim who was just trying to plan her special day. I realized in that moment that my anger was completely gone. It was replaced by a cold, crystal-clear clarity. They wanted a fight, but I was going to give them silence. I let out a soft breath, and I smiled. It was not a forced, tight smile, but the genuine smile of someone who has just been handed the key to their own prison cell. That is perfectly fine, I said. My voice was calm and even devoid of any sarcasm or sorrow. The disappointment on my mother's face was immediate and profound. She had positioned herself to be the stern mediator ready to tell me to calm down and stop making a scene. But I gave her nothing to mediate. I gave her complete compliance, which to a woman like Brenda was the ultimate insult, because it meant she had completely lost control over my emotions. My father blinked in confusion, his prepared arguments dying in his throat. Right on cue, the waiter approached our table, holding a heavy black leather folder containing the bill. My father, Thomas, made a half-hearted gesture toward his jacket pocket, a theatrical performance he always did when it was time to pay. He knew exactly how much dry-aged steaks and vintage champagne cost at a place like this, and I could see the slight tension in his shoulders. Before his hand even reached his wallet, I extended my arm and took the folder from the waiter. The total was $1,500. I did not flinch. I reached into my purse and pulled out my heavy titanium black Centurion American Express card. I placed it quietly onto the silver tray and handed it back to the waiter. The solid metal card made a distinct clink against the tray. Preston, who had been busy swirling his bourbon, paused. His eyes locked onto the card. For a man who claimed to come from generational wealth, he certainly lacked the subtle grace that true old money carried. True wealth did not stare wide-eyed at other people's credit cards. Preston cleared his throat, adjusting his posture as he tried to regain his footing. "Well, look at that," Preston said, a condescending smirk spreading across his face. "It is really nice that you can afford to treat us tonight, Kendra. I know you and Julian do well for yourselves in your little corporate jobs. It is sweet of you to chip in for your parents' anniversary. I was going to cover it, but you beat me to it. Keep grinding, Julian. Maybe one day you will make senior partner, and you can take us somewhere even nicer." The sheer audacity of his comment was almost comical. Julian was already a junior partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in the country, and my little corporate job was a global luxury hospitality empire that I owned outright. Preston, on the other hand, was wearing a luxury watch that I could tell from across the table was a very convincing replica. The weight of the metal was wrong, and the sweeping motion of the second hand was slightly off. But I did not correct him. I did not point out the flaw in his fake watch or the arrogant delusion in his words. I simply nodded. "You are entirely welcome, Preston," I replied, my voice smooth and untroubled. "I am always happy to take care of the bill. It is the least I can do since Julian and I will not be attending your wedding." Chloe narrowed her eyes, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the table. She was deeply frustrated. The narrative was slipping away from her. She had dropped the ultimate bomb expecting me to burst into flames, but instead, I had gracefully sidestepped the explosion and paid for the privilege of leaving. "Are you seriously not going to fight me on this?" Chloe asked, her voice losing its manufactured sweetness and revealing the spoiled child underneath. "You are just going to surrender your wedding weekend like that?" I stood up, smoothing the front of my silk dress. "There is no fight to be had, Chloe," I said warmly. "You and Preston clearly have a grand vision for your day at the Botanical Garden. Julian and I have our own plans. There is no overlap, and there is no competition. We wish you nothing but the absolute best." Julian stood up beside me, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. He offered a polite, respectful nod to my parents, who were staring up at us in bewildered silence. "Happy anniversary, Brenda and Thomas," he said, his tone perfectly professional. "Enjoy your dessert, and have a safe drive home." Without waiting for their response, Julian placed a guiding hand on my lower back, and we turned away from the table. We did not rush. We walked with the slow, measured pace of people who had absolutely nowhere to be and nothing left to prove. We walked past the glittering chandeliers and the tables of wealthy patrons, leaving my family sitting there in the private dining room, surrounded by half-empty wine glasses, and the lingering realization that they had finally pushed me away and I had gladly agreed to go. Stepping out of the restaurant, the cool Atlanta night air felt incredibly refreshing against my skin. It was as if I had just walked out of a suffocating underground vault. The valet immediately recognized us and jogged over to his podium. Within minutes, a sleek black chauffeured town car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out to open the door, and I slid into the luxurious leather back seat, Julian sliding in right behind me. The heavy door closed, shutting out the noise of the city traffic. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet hum of the engine was the only sound as the car pulled away from the restaurant, leaving my family far behind us in the rearview mirror. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, feeling a massive weight lift off my chest. Julian reached over to the console and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed me one, his dark eyes studying my face in the soft passing glow of the streetlights. "You handled that perfectly," he said softly, taking my hand in his. "But I know you, Kendra. You did not just surrender because you wanted to keep the peace. You have a $10 million private villa sitting in the hills of Tuscany, fully staffed and waiting for our wedding day. You have Michelin star chefs, an international guest list, and a venue that would make Preston's fake country club friends weep with absolute envy. Are you really not going to tell them?" I took a slow sip of my water, letting the cool liquid soothe my throat. I thought about my mother's cold stare and my father's eager dismissal. I thought about my sister's desperate need for attention and Preston's arrogant, patronizing smirk. I thought about the decades of being told I was not enough, and the incredible peace that came with finally accepting that I never would be enough for them. I turned to look at Julian, a slow, determined smile spreading across my face. "No," I replied, my voice steady and resolute in the quiet car. "Let them invest everything they have in Preston. They wanted high society. They are about to find out exactly what his last name is truly worth." 2 weeks passed since that dinner. I did not receive a single text or phone call from my parents. They did not call to apologize, and they certainly did not call to ask how my wedding planning was going. They were completely consumed by the grand spectacle of Chloe and Preston tying the knot. That was fine by me. I used the silence to finalize the logistics for my Tuscan villa, ensuring the private jets for my guests were fully chartered, and the imported French silk for my custom gown was secured. My life was peaceful. Until a Tuesday morning, when the private elevator that opened directly into my Buckhead penthouse let out a soft chime. I was standing at my kitchen island, wearing a silk robe, sipping black coffee, and reviewing a merger contract for one of my boutique hotel properties. I assumed the person stepping out of the elevator was my executive assistant, bringing the revised documents I had requested. I did not even look up from my tablet. Then I heard the sharp, frantic clicking of designer heels against my imported Brazilian hardwood floors. I raised my head. Chloe was marching toward me, looking like a hurricane wrapped in a pastel pink matching set. Her face was flushed, and she was aggressively clutching a thick cream-colored folder against her chest. I stared at her in mild amusement and sheer confusion. My building had some of the strictest security protocols in Atlanta. You needed a personalized key fob just to activate the elevator to my floor. "How did you get up here?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm as I took another sip of my coffee. Chloe rolled her eyes and tossed her designer handbag onto my pristine white leather sofa. "I told the new guy at the concierge desk that I was your sister and that it was an absolute wedding emergency," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I cried a little bit and said you were expecting me." He felt bad and swiped his master key for me. "Honestly, Kendra, your security is a joke. Anyone could just walk in here." "Not anyone," I corrected her smoothly. "Just a manipulative sister who knows exactly how to weaponize fake tears to get what she wants." "What do you want, Chloe?" She completely ignored my comment. She did not bother to look around my home. She did not admire the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. She did not comment on the original abstract artwork hanging on the walls or the custom marble countertops. To Chloe, my success was invisible unless she could find a way to spend it. She marched right up to the kitchen island and slapped the cream-colored folder down right on top of my legal documents. She pushed it across the marble surface toward me. I need you to take care of this, she demanded. Her tone was not a request. It was an expectation. I looked down at the folder. The logo embossed in gold foil on the front belonged to one of the most exclusive elite floral design firms in the Southeast. They were known for outfitting celebrity events and million-dollar galas. I opened the folder. Inside was a detailed line-item invoice. It listed thousands of imported white orchids, cascading ceiling installations, custom-built floral arches, and out-of-season peonies flown in directly from Holland. I scanned down to the bottom right corner of the page. The total balance due was exactly $45,000. I slowly closed the folder and looked back up at my sister. What exactly is this, Chloe? It is the floral invoice for my wedding, she said, crossing her arms and shifting her weight to one leg. Preston's mother invited an extra 50 people from their country club. They are extremely high society, Kendra. We had to upgrade the centerpieces to make the ballroom look lush enough to meet their standards. Mom and Dad are already tapped out paying for the upgraded catering and the live band, so you need to pay this. I stared at her, letting the absolute absurdity of her demand hang in the quiet air of my penthouse. You broke into my home to hand me a $45,000 bill for a wedding you and our parents explicitly uninvited me from. Chloe let out an exasperated sigh, acting as if I was the one being unreasonable. Oh, do not be so dramatic, Kendra. No one uninvited you. You chose to be difficult at dinner. Besides, you are the older sister. It is your duty to help out the family. Mom told me you and Julian are basically just going to the courthouse or doing some tiny little backyard thing anyway. Since you are saving so much money by not having a real wedding, you obviously have the extra budget. Think of this as your sisterly contribution to my big day. Her delusion was profound. She genuinely believed that because my wedding was not taking place at her chosen venue, it was not a real wedding. She genuinely believed that my hard-earned money was simply a communal family fund, waiting to be drained for her benefit. My parents had spent 30 years programming her to believe that the world revolved around her desires, and that I existed solely to be her safety net. I am not paying your florist, Chloe, I said, picking up my tablet and turning my attention back to my contracts. Take your little folder and leave my apartment. Tell the concierge on your way out that he is fired for letting you up here. Chloe's face twisted into a mask of pure indignation. You cannot be serious, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. You are going to ruin my wedding over a few $1,000s. You are so selfish, Kendra. You have all this space and all this money, and you refuse to help your own flesh and blood. Preston's family is going to think we are poor if we do not have those orchids. They are going to judge us. That sounds like a Preston problem, I replied, not even bothering to look up. Maybe his wealthy old money family should open their checkbook to impress their own friends. If they are so high society, $45,000 should be pocket change to them. Chloe slammed her hands down on the marble counter. You do not understand how things work at this level, Kendra, she sneered. Preston's family provides the legacy and the social standing. Our family provides the execution. It is a partnership. You are just trying to sabotage me because you are jealous that I am marrying into a prominent family while you are settling for someone like Julian. I finally looked up. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I was about to give her exactly 30 seconds to grab her fake invoice and get into the elevator before I called the police to have her physically removed for trespassing. I opened my mouth to deliver the warning, but before I could speak, the heavy oak front door of my penthouse swung open. My security system let out a low warning beep. Chloe had apparently propped the door open with a decorative doorstop from the hallway to let her fiance bypass the security desk entirely. Preston strolled into my living room with the casual, arrogant swagger of a man who believed he owned every room he walked into. He was wearing an expensive-looking golf polo and khaki slacks, swinging a set of car keys around his index finger. He did not bother to wipe his shoes or announce his presence. He just looked around my carefully curated home with a faint smirk on his face. "Babe, what is taking so long?" Preston called out, completely ignoring me. I am illegally parked downstairs and the valet is giving me a hard time. Did you get the check from your sister yet, or do I need to explain the floral concept to her myself? He walked up to stand right beside Chloe, wrapping an arm around her waist and looking at me as if I were the hired help holding up his busy schedule. He carried his entitled attitude like a weapon, completely unaware that he had just stepped into the absolute worst place he could possibly be. Preston leaned against my marble kitchen island, crossing his ankles and flashing a patronizing smile. He looked around my penthouse again, his eyes skimming over the custom finishes, but failing to recognize their actual value. To him, I was just Chloe's older sister, who worked a tedious corporate job and managed to rent a nice apartment. He completely lacked the sophisticated eye required to identify the millions of dollars in art and architecture surrounding him. "Let me break this down for you, Kendra," he said, his tone dripping with the kind of forced patience a teacher uses with a slow student. "My family has a certain reputation to uphold in this city. The people attending this wedding are not your average guests. We are talking about state senators, corporate executives, and the founding members of the country club. They expect a specific standard of elegance. When they walk into the botanical garden, they expect to see cascading white orchids, not some cheap grocery store flower arrangement." I stood perfectly still, letting him talk. I wanted him to put all his cards on the table. Now I know $45,000 sounds like a massive amount of money to someone on a standard salary. Preston continued waving his hand dismissively. "But you have to look at the bigger picture. This is an investment in the family's social standing. Your parents understand that. In fact, Brenda and Thomas are doing an incredible job stepping up to the plate." Thomas just liquidated a significant portion of his retirement portfolio this morning to cover the upgraded caviar bar and the ice sculptures my mother requested. They know what is at stake here. They are doing their part to make sure Chloe fits into my world seamlessly. So, it is only fair that you do your part too. The silence in the room was absolute. I stared at him, processing the sheer magnitude of what he had just casually revealed. My parents were draining their life savings. They were pulling money out of their retirement accounts, selling off their future security to buy ice sculptures and fish eggs, to impress a group of wealthy white socialites who would probably forget their names the second the reception ended. They were financially ruining themselves to buy their way into a world that would never truly accept them. And Preston stood there practically glowing with arrogance, viewing their financial sacrifice as nothing more than his rightful due. He truly believed he was doing our family a massive favor simply by allowing my sister to take his last name. Chloe nodded vigorously beside him. "Exactly," she chimed in. "Mom and Dad are making real sacrifices, Kendra. You are sitting up here in this big apartment, saving all your money by having some cheap little backyard wedding. The least you can do is write a check so I do not have to walk down the aisle looking like a peasant. Just write the check, and we will get out of your hair." I looked down at the cream-colored floral invoice sitting on the counter. Then I looked back up, locking my eyes directly onto Preston. I did not blink. I did not break eye contact. I slowly reached out and picked up the thick folder. Preston smiled, leaning back in satisfaction. "There we go," he said softly. "I knew you would see reason once I explained how things work at this level." I did not reach for a pen. I did not reach for my checkbook. Instead, I took 2 steps to the right, where a sleek, heavy-duty cross-cut paper shredder was seamlessly integrated into my custom kitchen cabinetry. It was meant for securely destroying confidential corporate merger documents and financial records. It was powerful enough to chew through credit cards and metal staples. I reached down and pressed the power button. The machine hummed to life with a low, intimidating mechanical growl. "What are you doing?" Chloe asked, her voice pitching upward in sudden confusion. I did not look at her. I kept my eyes entirely fixed on Preston's smug face. I held the cream-colored folder over the metal teeth of the shredder. Then I let it go. The machine roared as it caught the thick cardstock. The sound of tearing paper filled the quiet penthouse, a violent, aggressive noise that shattered Preston's carefully constructed illusion of control. Within 3 seconds, the entire $45,000 invoice, along with its gold foil logo and detailed line items, was reduced to completely illegible confetti sitting at the bottom of a plastic bin. The machine clicked off, returning the room to a stunned, ringing silence. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Chloe shrieked, her face turning a bright, blotchy red. She lunged forward as if she could somehow reconstruct the shredded paper from the machine. That was the original invoice, Kendra. "You just destroyed my wedding florals." I dusted my hands off lightly. "I am not paying your florist, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register. "I am not funding your social climbing, and I am certainly not subsidizing the fake lifestyle you and your fiance are trying to project. You broke into my home to demand my money for a wedding I am not even attending. That is the behavior of a desperate beggar, not a high society bride." Preston's face flushed with sudden anger, the polite facade completely vanishing. "You listen to me, you arrogant bitch," he snapped, stepping toward me. "You are going to regret doing that. You owe this family." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I was standing inches away from him. I did not flinch or back down. I looked up at him with absolute dead-eyed calm. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I said softly. "And for the record, my liquid assets are currently tied up in European real estate. Even if I wanted to throw my money into the black hole of your ego, I simply do not have the disposable cash on hand today. Now both of you need to leave my home before I have security drag you out through the lobby." For a second there was total silence. Then Chloe burst into a sharp, hysterical bark of laughter. "European real estate," she mocked, her voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. "Listen to yourself, Kendra. You are completely delusional. European real estate. What is it, a timeshare in Spain? A hostel in Germany? You are sitting here making up ridiculous lies to avoid helping your own sister. You have delusions of grandeur. You think you are so much better than us because you have a nice view of the city. But you are nothing." She grabbed her designer bag from the sofa, her hands shaking with rage. "You are dead to this family," she spat, walking toward the door. "Do not even think about showing up to the botanical garden. Do not call Mom. Do not call Dad. You are completely cut off. We are done with you." Preston pointed a warning finger at me, his face tight with fury. "You are going to end up completely alone, Kendra. Enjoy your fake European real estate." He turned on his heel and followed Chloe out the door. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them with a massive, echoing thud. The security lock automatically clicked into place, sealing my penthouse and returning my sanctuary to total silence. I stood alone in the center of my living room. I did not feel sad. I did not feel rejected. I felt a deep, thrilling sense of anticipation. They thought they had just punished me by cutting me off. They had no idea they had just walked blindly into the greatest trap I could have possibly set. I walked over to the coffee machine to pour myself a fresh cup. Just as my hand touched the ceramic mug, my personal cell phone buzzed violently against the marble counter. I picked it up. The caller ID flashed the name of the elite private investigator I had hired on retainer for my corporate background checks. I swiped the screen to answer. "Good morning, Marcus," I said. "Good morning, Miss Kendra." Marcus replied, his voice professional and urgent. "I have the financial dossiers you requested on Preston Spencer and his family. I think you are going to want to sit down for this. They are not who they claim to be." I pulled out a bar stool and sat down, a slow smile spreading across my face. "Tell me everything," I said. I walked over to my home office and sat down in my leather executive chair. I tapped the screen of my computer to wake it up and open the secure email portal. Marcus had already sent over the encrypted files. I entered my passcode, and the documents populated across my dual monitors. I put my phone on speaker and set it on the glass desk. "Go ahead, Marcus," I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. "Miss Kendra, it is worse than we thought," Marcus began, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "The Spencer family has been riding on fumes, and the ghost of their last name for over a decade. Their generational wealth dried up completely right around the time Preston was in college. His father made a series of catastrophic investments in commercial real estate that wiped out the family trust. I scrolled through the first set of documents. There were bank statements, foreclosure notices, and tax liens. It was a complete financial bloodbath. So how are they still living in that massive estate in Buckhead? I asked, watching a spreadsheet full of red numbers scroll past my eyes. They do not own it anymore, Marcus replied flatly. They have taken out 3 separate mortgages on the property just to keep the lights on. They are currently 6 months behind on payments. The bank is preparing to initiate formal foreclosure proceedings before the end of the year. Their membership at the elite country club Preston loves to brag about was suspended 2 years ago for non-payment of dues. The only reason they are still allowed through the front gate is because the club manager feels sorry for his mother. I let out a harsh laugh, shaking my head at the absolute absurdity of it all. Preston had just stood in my kitchen demanding $45,000 for orchids so his mother would not be embarrassed in front of her country club friends. He had acted like a billionaire, inconvenienced by the peasantry while he was effectively homeless and buried in debt. It gets worse. Marcus continued, the sound of him flipping through paper coming through the speaker. Preston does not actually have a job. That consulting firm he claims to work for is a shell company registered to his college roommate. He has no reported income for the last 3 tax cycles. He is completely broke. I stared at the screen, tracing the complex web of lies Preston and his family had spun. But why go through with this massive wedding, I asked. If they are this deep in the hole, a high society wedding at the Botanical Garden is the absolute last thing they can afford. Because they are not paying for it, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a serious register. Your parents are paying for it. I pulled the vendor contracts for the Botanical Garden and the catering companies. The Spencer family is listed as the primary host on the invitations, but every single deposit, every single credit card authorization, and every single wire transfer has come directly from your father's accounts. I felt a cold realization wash over me. Thomas liquidating his retirement portfolio was not just about buying ice sculptures or caviar, it was a total financial drain. The Spencers are using this wedding to keep up appearances, Marcus explained. By making your parents pay for these massive luxury upgrades, they get to maintain the illusion of wealth within their social circle. They are inviting all their creditors and wealthy associates to this wedding to show them that they are still prominent players. It is a delay tactic. They are hoping this marriage to your sister will somehow buy them enough social capital to secure new loans or find a wealthy investor to bail them out. And they are bleeding your parents dry to do it. I pulled up the latest financial statement from my father's community bank. My parents were not wealthy in the way I was. They had comfortable upper-middle-class savings built over decades of working and saving. They had a solid retirement fund and the equity in their house. But looking at the numbers Marcus had uncovered, they were rapidly burning through every safety net they had. They were funding a 6-figure wedding for a man who looked down on them simply because he had white skin and a recognizable last name. Preston was not marrying Chloe out of love. He was marrying her because her parents were desperate enough for social validation that they would willingly act as his personal ATM. He had found the perfect marks. My parents were so blinded by their own prejudice and their desperate need to elevate Chloe that they had handed the keys to their financial future to a con artist in a fake luxury watch. I have the hard copies being couriered to your building right now, Marcus said, breaking the silence. Miss Kendra, you have all the proof you need. You could take this file to your father right now. One look at these tax liens and he would cancel the wedding entirely. You have the power to stop this. I thanked Marcus and ended the call. A few minutes later, the concierge sent up the thick manila envelope containing the physical dossiers. I brought them to my desk and spread the documents out across the glass surface. I looked at the official bank seal on the foreclosure notices. I looked at the zero balances on Preston's checking accounts. I held the absolute destruction of my sister's dream wedding in the palm of my hand. One phone call to my father and the entire charade would collapse. One email to Chloe with these attachments and her perfect high society illusion would shatter into a million irreparable pieces. I could save my parents from financial ruin. I could protect the retirement money my father had worked 40 years to accumulate. I could step in and be the responsible older sister fixing the mess my family had blindly walked into. I slowly gathered the papers, tapping the edges against the desk to align them into a neat stack. I thought about the anniversary dinner at the steakhouse. I thought about my mother looking at me with pure disdain, telling me I needed to step aside because I was not important enough. I thought about my father demanding I cancel my own wedding date to accommodate Preston. I thought about the thousands of times they had chosen Chloe over me, leaving me to fend for myself while they gave her everything. I thought about Preston standing in my kitchen just 20 minutes ago, pointing his finger at me and calling me an arrogant bitch. I thought about Chloe mocking my success and telling me I was dead to the family. They had explicitly told me they did not want me in their lives. They had made their bed with Preston. They worshipped his fake pedigree and despised my actual hard-earned success. If I warned them now, they would not thank me. They would accuse me of forging the documents out of jealousy. They would call me bitter and vindictive. They would find a way to twist the truth to protect their precious golden child and her perfect fiance. I walked over to the large painting hanging on the far wall of my office. I pulled the frame forward, revealing the heavy steel wall safe hidden behind it. I punched in my biometric code and the heavy metal door clicked open. I slid the thick dossier of Preston's financial ruin onto the top shelf right next to the deed for my $10 million Tuscan villa. I closed the safe, locking it with a solid, definitive thud. I was not going to save them. They had spent my entire life breaking my spirit and stealing my joy. Now it was their turn to pay the price for their choices. Let them drain their retirement accounts. Let them fund the caviar and the white orchids. Let them invest every single dollar they had into a man who despised them. I was going to let them write their own checks, and I was going to watch their entire world burn from the comfort of my own empire. I spent the next few days completely immersed in the expansion of my hospitality empire. My corporate headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming glass skyscraper in downtown Atlanta. Walking through the polished corridors, I was surrounded by a team of brilliant, dedicated professionals who respected my vision and executed my strategies flawlessly. Here, I was not the disappointing older sister or the forgotten workhorse. I was the founder and chief executive officer. I was the woman who signed the checks, commanded the room, and built luxury experiences from the ground up. The contrast between my actual reality and the pathetic version of me my family held in their minds was almost laughable. It was Thursday afternoon and I was sitting at my custom mahogany desk reviewing the architectural blueprints for a new eco-resort in Costa Rica. My executive assistant Maya knocked softly on the glass door before stepping into the room. Maya was a brilliant young woman who had been by my side for 5 years, helping me build my company into the powerhouse it was today. She held my personal cell phone in her hand with a hesitant, almost apologetic look on her face. She told me my mother was calling and had insisted to the reception desk that it was an absolute bridal emergency. I took the phone and gestured for Maya to stay in the room. I pressed the answer button and put the phone on speaker, setting it down on top of the blueprints. Brenda's voice crackled through the speaker. She did not bother to say hello or ask how my day was going. She never did. She launched straight into her agenda with the aggressive confidence of a woman who believed the world existed solely to serve her. Kendra, I am calling to let you know that I had to make a slight adjustment to your schedule this weekend, she announced. I leaned back in my leather chair, raising an eyebrow. My schedule was managed entirely by Maya, and my mother had absolutely zero access to my calendar. What kind of adjustment, Brenda? I asked, my voice perfectly level and devoid of emotion. She sighed, a heavy, dramatic sound meant to convey just how exhausting it was to deal with me. I called the Marie Antoinette Bridal Boutique this morning, she said. I know you had a VIP fitting scheduled for Saturday afternoon. I spoke to the boutique manager and I used your name to cancel your appointment. I transferred the booking entirely over to Chloe. The Marie Antoinette Bridal Boutique was the most exclusive local wedding dress shop in the entire state of Georgia. They only took 2 VIP brides a month, shutting down the entire store to offer private champagne consultations. Women waited over a year just to get a foot through the door. To secure a Saturday afternoon slot required serious social connections and a massive non-refundable deposit. My mother had just called them, impersonated me over the phone, and stolen my highly coveted reservation to give to her golden child. Chloe is just under so much stress right now. Brenda continued, her tone shifting into a defensive posture before I could even respond. Preston's family is expecting her to look like royalty. She needs a custom gown that screams high society. You understand, right, Kendra? Chloe needs the spotlight right now. It is crucial for the family image that she outshines everyone else at the botanical garden. I looked up at Maya, who was standing by the door with her mouth slightly open in pure shock. Maya knew exactly what was happening because Maya was the one who had organized the boutique appointment in the first place. Maya's eyes darted from the phone to me, waiting for me to explode. I did not say anything, so Brenda kept talking, digging her hole deeper and revealing the absolute depths of her cruelty. Honestly, Kendra, you should just go to a department store and buy something off the rack, she said, her voice dripping with casual disdain. You are keeping your wedding so small and quiet anyway. There is no point in you wasting an exclusive appointment on a dress no one is even going to see. Plus, let us be real. You were never the glamorous type anyway. You are handsome, and you are a hard worker, but Chloe is the beauty of the family. She deserves a dress that reflects her status. There it was. The ultimate favoritism laid bare without a single ounce of shame or hesitation. 10 years ago, hearing my mother call me plain and unworthy of a beautiful wedding dress would have broken my heart. I would have locked myself in my bedroom and cried until my eyes were swollen, asking the universe why I was so unlovable to the woman who gave birth to me. I would have internalized her cruelty and believed that I truly did not deserve anything special. I would have fought her, screaming through the phone, trying to prove that I was just as worthy of a beautiful bridal moment as my younger sister. But today, sitting in my multi-million-dollar office, wearing a tailored designer suit, I felt absolutely nothing but a deep, profound pity for the woman on the other end of the line. She was so trapped in her own shallow, materialistic worldview that she could not even comprehend the damage she was doing. She was actively stealing a joyful moment from her eldest daughter to fund a fake high society fantasy for her youngest. She was willingly sacrificing my happiness on the altar of Chloe's ego. I looked at the phone and I smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached my eyes. That makes perfect sense, Brenda, I said, my voice cheerful and completely unbothered. I am glad you were able to get the appointment transferred without any issues. The boutique has some lovely pieces. I am sure Chloe will find something that perfectly matches her exact level of sophistication. There was a long, dead silence on the line. Brenda had braced herself for a massive fight. She had probably rehearsed a whole speech about how selfish I was being and how I needed to sacrifice for my sister yet again. She wanted me to yell so she could hang up the phone, feeling justified in her actions. By agreeing with her instantly and cheerfully, I had completely derailed her script. She did not know how to handle my peaceful surrender. You are not mad, she asked, her voice thick with suspicion and obvious confusion. Why would I be mad? I replied smoothly, picking up a gold pen from my desk. You are absolutely right, Brenda. Chloe needs that dress far more than I do. Tell her to have a wonderful time at the fitting on Saturday. I will just figure out something else to wear. Have a great day. I reached forward and tapped the red button, ending the call before she could utter another word. The office was quiet again, save for the soft hum of the central air conditioning. Maya stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief and righteous anger. Did your mother really just steal your bridal appointment? She asked, her voice a mixture of horror and outrage. Are you really going to let her get away with that, Miss Kendra? You waited months for that slot. I let out a soft laugh and shook my head, putting my pen down. I leaned back in my chair, feeling lighter than I had in years. I let her take it. Maya, I said softly. Maya looked entirely confused. But why, she asked. You deserve a beautiful dress just as much as anyone else. I smiled, looking at my brilliant assistant. I do deserve a beautiful dress, I agreed. But I never intended to use that local designer for myself anyway. I booked that appointment and paid the $10,000 deposit because I knew you were getting married next spring. I was going to take you there on Saturday to buy your wedding dress, as a bonus for all your hard work this year. Maya gasped, covering her mouth with her hands, as tears instantly sprang to her eyes. You were going to buy my dress, she whispered. I nodded. But now my mother and sister have officially claimed the appointment. I said, my smile turning into a sharp, calculated grin. What Brenda does not realize is that the boutique requires the bride to purchase a dress that equals or exceeds the deposit. Since Chloe took my name off the reservation, she also took her name off my credit card authorization. She is walking into a luxury boutique expecting a free ride, but she is going to be hit with a minimum $50,000 price tag the moment she selects her custom gown. And since they are trying to impress Preston's family, she will absolutely refuse to leave empty-handed. Maya let out a bark of laughter, wiping her eyes. They just stole a massive bill, she said, realizing the trap. Exactly, I replied. I will book us a private fitting in Paris for your dress next month, Maya. Do not worry about that. As for me, I already have my wardrobe secured. My luggage is packed, and my private jet is waiting on the tarmac. Julian and I are flying out tonight. Where are we going? Maya asked, pulling out her tablet to check my revised itinerary. I stood up from my desk, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the sprawling city of Atlanta. I am going to Milan, I said quietly. I have a final fitting at a legendary haute couture house tomorrow morning. Chloe can have the local spotlight. I am stepping onto the international stage. I left my office that evening feeling an immense sense of liberation. When I arrived back at the penthouse, Julian was already waiting for me in our master suite. My set of vintage Louis Vuitton trunks, which I had purchased at a private auction in Paris a few years ago, was laid out on the velvet ottoman. Packing for this trip did not feel like preparing for a wedding, it felt like preparing for a coronation. We were not just leaving Atlanta. We were leaving behind the suffocating weight of my family's expectations. Within 2 hours, a black car drove us straight to the private aviation terminal. There were no security lines, no crowds, and no delayed announcements. The captain of my company's Gulfstream jet greeted us on the tarmac, taking our luggage and welcoming us aboard. Julian and I settled into the plush cream leather seats as the flight attendant poured us 2 glasses of perfectly chilled champagne. As the jet taxied down the runway and lifted smoothly into the night sky, I looked out the window at the glittering lights of Atlanta shrinking below us. Down there, my parents were draining their retirement accounts, and my sister was preparing to walk into a $50,000 trap. Up here, the air was completely silent. I connected my phone to the in-flight wireless network and opened Instagram. I did not follow my sister, but her profile was public, and her stories were always at the top of the search page. I tapped her profile picture. Chloe had posted a dozen frantic updates in the last 3 hours. The carefully curated pastel aesthetic she usually maintained was completely gone. In her latest video, she was sitting in the driver's seat of her car parked right outside the Marie Antoinette Bridal Boutique. Her face was flushed, and her mascara was slightly smudged. She was speaking rapidly to the camera, ranting about how the wedding industry was a massive scam and how local designers were trying to exploit her. She complained that Preston's parents were demanding she wear a gown with a 6-foot train, but that the boutique was being entirely unreasonable about their pricing structures. She did not mention the $50,000 minimum requirement, of course. She would never admit to her followers that she could not afford something. Instead, she spun a desperate narrative about being a stressed perfectionist bride who was struggling to balance her own simple tastes with the grand expectations of her high society in-laws. It was a spectacular display of a woman completely drowning in a cup of water. She was begging her followers for sympathy while actively burning through money she did not have. I locked my phone and set it face down on the polished wood table. The contrast between her chaotic reality and my absolute peace was almost poetic. Julian reached across the table and took my hand. "Stop watching the car crash," he said with a warm smile. "We have our own details to finalize." He was right. I opened my tablet and pulled up the master spreadsheet for our wedding weekend. We were not debating over local vendor minimums or arguing about who would pay for the centerpieces. I was reviewing the final wine pairings for our rehearsal dinner and the main reception. The sommelier had sent over a detailed list of recommendations, but I did not need to outsource the decisions. Every single bottle of wine being served at our wedding was coming from my own private vineyard. 3 years ago, I had purchased a sprawling historic wine estate in the Tuscan countryside surrounding my villa. It was an investment that my parents knew absolutely nothing about. While Preston was bragging about his favorite imported bourbon at country clubs that had banned his family, I was literally producing vintage wines under my own label. I scrolled through the tasting notes, selecting a robust red blend to pair with the main course and a crisp, sparkling white for the toasts. It was a quiet, profound joy to know that our guests would be celebrating our union by drinking the literal fruits of my own labor. We landed in Milan the next morning. The sky was a brilliant, unclouded blue, and the crisp European air carried the faint scent of espresso and old stone. A private chauffeur navigated the narrow, elegant streets, taking us directly to the fashion district. The legendary haute couture house was located inside a stunning historic palazzo with grand arched windows and heavy iron doors. When I walked inside, I was not handed a clipboard or told to wait in a crowded lobby. The head designer, a brilliant woman who had dressed royalty and global icons, greeted me personally. She kissed both my cheeks and led me into a massive private fitting room lined with gilded mirrors and soft velvet seating. Julian was offered a seat and a cup of rich black coffee, while the assistants brought out my gown. It was a masterpiece. The dress was crafted from layers of imported French silk with intricate hand-sewn beadwork that caught the light with every movement. It was not a dress pulled off a rack in a crowded local shop. It was a garment designed specifically for my body, representing months of careful artistry. When I stepped onto the pedestal and looked at myself in the mirror, my breath caught in my throat. I did not look like the plain, unglamorous sister my mother had always described. I looked powerful. I looked beautiful. I looked like a woman who had built an empire and was about to marry the love of her life on her own terms. The designer adjusted the train, smoothing the silk with absolute reverence. "It is perfect," she murmured. "You carry the dress with true elegance, Kendra." I smiled, catching Julian's eye in the mirror. He was looking at me with an expression of pure adoration and pride. There was no stress in this room. There was no pressure to impress wealthy strangers or uphold a fake family legacy. There was only the quiet certainty of two people who had earned exactly what they were experiencing. After the fitting, we returned to our luxury suite at the Bulgari Hotel. The French doors were open, letting the warm afternoon breeze sweep through the room. Julian stepped into the marble shower while I ordered a light lunch from room service. I walked out onto the balcony overlooking the stunning architecture of the city, holding a cup of espresso. I felt completely detached from the toxic drama playing out an ocean away in Atlanta. My parents and my sister felt like characters in a bad reality show that I had simply turned off. I had protected my peace, and in a few days, Julian and I would take a short helicopter ride from Milan directly to my Tuscan villa to prepare for our guests. Just as I took a sip of my coffee, my phone chimed softly from the bedside table. I walked back into the room and picked it up. It was an email from my lead publicist marked with high-priority flags. I swiped the screen to open the message. "Good afternoon, Kendra," my publicist wrote. "I wanted to send this over before you completely unplugged for your wedding week. The editorial team just sent the final proofs. The digital embargo lifts in 12 hours, and the print edition hits newsstands globally tomorrow morning. Get ready for a massive wave of press. I scrolled down and tapped the attached file. It was the final layout for the digital cover story of one of the most prominent luxury lifestyle magazines in the world. The image on the screen was breathtaking. It was a sweeping aerial photograph of my $10 million Tuscan estate, showcasing the rolling vineyards, the ancient stone architecture, and the pristine infinity pool overlooking the valley. Below the photograph, the headline was printed in bold, elegant typography. Inside the $10 million Tuscan sanctuary of international hospitality, Queen Kendra. I swiped to the next page. The article detailed my rise in the corporate world, my massive real estate acquisitions, and the exclusive boutique hotels I owned. It spoke about my independence and my strategic brilliance. But the real hook was buried in the second paragraph of the feature. The journalist had explicitly noted that this magnificent private estate would serve as the highly guarded venue for my upcoming nuptials this September, gathering an elite international crowd to celebrate my marriage. The secret was officially documented, formatted, and ready to be broadcast to millions of readers around the world. In less than 12 hours, my family's delusion that I was a struggling corporate worker having a cheap backyard wedding would be publicly obliterated. I stood in the center of the hotel suite staring at the screen. The trap was set, and I did not even have to pull the trigger myself. The world was about to do it for me. I stared at the screen, letting the reality of the moment sink in. I handed the tablet to Julian, who had just walked out of the shower, a white towel wrapped around his waist. He wiped the steam from his eyes and read the headline. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his handsome face. He sat next to me on the plush velvet sofa, and we scrolled through the entire 12-page spread together. The photography was absolutely magnificent, capturing the rustic elegance of the stone courtyard, the centuries-old olive groves, and the expansive private wine cellar. The journalist had done an impeccable job tracing my career journey from a solitary, ambitious young woman to the founder and chief executive of a global luxury empire. They detailed the boutique hotels I had built across 3 continents, the eco-resorts in development, and the massive real estate portfolio I managed. But the most devastating part of the article, for my family at least, was the section detailing my personal life. The writer eloquently described my upcoming September wedding. They wrote about the highly exclusive international guest list, the custom haute couture gown being fitted in Milan, the private chartered flights for my colleagues, and the Michelin star catering team I had secured. They painted a picture of a woman completely in control of her destiny, marrying a brilliant corporate attorney in an event that defined true modern luxury. It was not a tacky society wedding funded by drained retirement accounts and desperate credit card swipes. It was a masterpiece of the afternoon, enjoying the beauty of Milan. We walked through the historic fashion galleries, ate handmade pasta at a quiet corner cafe, and completely ignored the ticking clock. By the time we returned to the hotel suite and the sun began to set over the Italian skyline, casting a golden glow across the city, the digital embargo officially lifted. The article went live on the magazine website and was immediately blasted across all their global social media channels. Within minutes, my corporate phone started buzzing with congratulatory emails from board members, international investors, and industry peers. My hospitality company public relations team reported a massive spike in web traffic and booking inquiries. The world was watching, and they loved the story of the self-made luxury hospitality queen. Back in Atlanta, it was mid-morning. I could picture the exact sequence of events with crystal clarity. Chloe lived on social media. She followed all the major luxury lifestyle accounts, obsessively comparing her own pastel aesthetic to the true wealth she desperately wanted to emulate. She would have been sitting in our parents' kitchen, probably complaining about her floral budget or demanding more money for a photographer, when the notification popped up on her feed. She would have seen the breathtaking aerial shot of the Tuscan estate, first admiring the historic architecture and the lush green hills. Then her eyes would have scrolled down to read the bold caption. She would have seen my name. Not just my first name, but my full name listed alongside the title of International Hospitality Queen. She would have clicked the link completely paralyzed by confusion and sheer disbelief. She would have read the description of the $10 million property, the private vineyard, and the multi-million-dollar corporate empire I owned outright. She would have read the paragraph detailing my highly exclusive September wedding at this exact estate, the same wedding she had mocked and dismissed as a cheap backyard gathering. I could imagine the exact moment her manufactured high society delusion violently shattered against the solid wall of my actual reality. All the bragging she had done about Preston and his fake old money, all the condescension she had hurled at me, and all the sacrifices my parents were making to fund her basic ballroom wedding, would suddenly feel incredibly small and entirely pathetic. She would have shoved her phone into my mother's face. Brenda, who had just yesterday stolen my bridal appointment because I was not glamorous enough, would have been forced to look at high-definition photographs of her eldest daughter living a life of unimaginable wealth and influence. My father Thomas would have grabbed the phone reading the paragraphs detailing my massive real estate acquisitions, realizing that his life savings were pennies compared to what I generated in a single fiscal quarter. They would have realized in that suffocating silent moment that I did not surrender my wedding date out of weakness or submission. I surrendered it because I was playing a game on a completely different board. And then there was Preston. I smiled just thinking about his reaction. Preston, who was currently facing federal tax evasion charges and multiple bank foreclosures, would have seen his future sister-in-law standing on the balcony of a $10 million European estate. The man who had stood in my kitchen calling me an arrogant bitch and demanding $45,000 would suddenly realize that the family he thought he was scamming actually contained a self-made millionaire whom he had deeply, repeatedly, and permanently alienated. The silence in that Atlanta kitchen must have been absolute. The realization that they had entirely cut off the only person in the family with actual power and infinite resources would have hit them like a physical blow. They had chosen the fake replica watch over the flawless diamond. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window of our hotel suite, watching the vibrant city lights of Milan flicker to life in the evening dusk. I felt a profound, absolute sense of closure. I did not need to yell or argue to prove my worth. I did not need to present bank statements to demand their respect. The truth was out there, printed in bold black letters for the entire world to see. Suddenly, the quiet ambiance of the hotel room was shattered. My personal cell phone resting on the smooth marble surface of the coffee table began to vibrate. The low, rhythmic buzzing sound echoed sharply in the quiet suite. It stopped for exactly 3 seconds, and then immediately started buzzing again. It was the frantic, aggressive ring pattern of someone calling back to back, unwilling to accept being ignored. I did not rush to pick it up. I walked slowly across the plush carpet, the soft fabric of my silk robe brushing lightly against my ankles. I stood over the table and looked down at the glowing screen. The caller ID flashed in bright white letters against the dark background. Mom. The secret was officially out. The empire they had ignored and the wedding they had tried to destroy were now the main headline across the globe. I watched the phone vibrate, dancing slightly across the marble surface, knowing that on the other end of that line was a woman who was finally experiencing the sheer, terrifying weight of her own terrible choices. I watched the phone vibrate across the smooth marble coffee table. The caller ID flashed my mother's name, bright and demanding in the dimming light of the Milan evening. Julian stood beside me, resting his hand gently on my shoulder. We both knew exactly what was happening in that house in Atlanta right now. I did not pick up the phone, I let it ring. I walked over to the espresso machine and poured myself a fresh, dark shot, savoring the rich, roasted aroma. The phone eventually stopped vibrating, plunging the suite back into a serene, luxurious silence. But the silence only lasted for exactly 1 minute before the phone lit up again. This time the caller ID flashed a different name. Dad. My father Thomas rarely called me. In fact, I could count on one hand the number of times he had dialed my number in the last 5 years, and every single one of those calls had been to ask me to do a financial or logistical favor for Chloe. For him to call me back to back right after my mother meant the situation was absolutely critical. They were panicking. The toxic power dynamic that had defined our family for 3 decades was collapsing in real time, and they had no idea how to handle it. I took a slow, measured sip of my espresso, letting the caffeine warm my chest. Then I reached out, picked up the phone, and swiped the screen to answer. I pressed the cool metal of the phone to my ear. "Hello, Thomas," I said, my voice perfectly calm and collected. "Kendra? What in the absolute world is going on?" My father exploded, his voice booming through the receiver with a chaotic mixture of raw panic and deep indignation. He was breathing heavily, as if he had been pacing the hardwood floors of their house. "Are you seeing this magazine article right now? Is this some kind of sick joke? Your mother is sitting in the kitchen hyperventilating, and Chloe has locked herself in her bedroom screaming. They are saying you own a $10 million property in Italy and a global hospitality company. Tell me right now that this is a lie, Kendra. Tell me this is some kind of promotional stunt for one of your corporate clients." I walked out onto the balcony, looking out over the glittering, historic skyline of the city. "It is not a lie, Dad," I replied smoothly. "Every single word printed in that article is entirely accurate. I own the villa, I own the vineyard, and I own the company outright. Julian and I are getting married there next week, just like the journalist wrote." There was a sharp, violent intake of breath on the other end of the line. When Thomas spoke again, his shock had quickly morphed into furious entitlement. "How could you possibly hide this from us?" he demanded, his voice rising in volume until it cracked. "How could you sit at that anniversary dinner, let us pay for your meal, and watch us struggle to pull together Chloe's wedding while you are sitting on tens of millions of dollars? You let us look like absolute fools, Kendra. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for the family? Preston's mother just texted your mother a direct link to the article. They are asking us why we kept your massive wealth a secret. You have completely humiliated us in front of the Spencers." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. His absolute lack of self-awareness was staggering. He was not upset that he had neglected his eldest daughter or missed out on my life. He was upset that my hidden success was making him look bad in front of a family of broke con artists. "I did not hide anything from you, Dad," I said, my tone dropping to a firm, icy register that made him instantly stop talking. "You simply never asked. You never cared. For the last 10 years, every time I tried to talk to you about my business or my real estate investments, you changed the subject. When I bought my first boutique hotel, you cut me off to talk about Chloe getting a brand sponsorship for a cheap face cream. When I secured the Tuscan estate, I tried to invite you and Mom to see it, but you told me you were too busy helping Preston look for vintage cars. You only ever cared about Chloe's social media metrics and Preston's fake old money pedigree. You created an environment where my success was an inconvenience to your narrative, so I stopped sharing my life with you." "But you are family," he stammered, stumbling over his words as his primary defense completely collapsed. "You are supposed to help us. Your sister is under an immense amount of pressure right now. We are draining our entire retirement funds to make this botanical garden event happen. If you had this kind of money, you should have stepped up. You should have offered to cover the floral arrangements or the catering without us having to ask. You sat in your penthouse and watched Preston ask for $45,000, and you destroyed the invoice right in front of his face. You are acting incredibly selfish, Kendra." I leaned against the intricate iron railing of the balcony, feeling the cool evening breeze against my skin. "Let us get something straight, Thomas," I said, cutting through his desperate rambling. "I do not owe you or Chloe a single dime of the empire I built with my own hands. You made your choices. You decided that Chloe was the golden child and that her high society wedding was the ultimate family priority. You explicitly told me to change my wedding date because my little gathering was not important enough for you to attend. Chloe told me I was cut off, and you stood by and let her say it. You made your bed with the Spencers, and now you get to lie in it. The silence on the line was thick and suffocating. My father was backed into a corner and he knew it. His anger had completely failed to intimidate me, so he immediately pivoted to a pathetic kind of bargaining. "Listen, Kendra, let us not do this," he said, his voice suddenly dropping to a frantic pleading whisper. "You have made your point, okay. You are highly successful. We are very proud of you. But you need to understand that things are getting very complicated over here. We need your help immediately. Chloe's wedding is falling apart. We cannot afford to keep up with the Spencers anymore, and there is a massive situation with the venue." I paused, my eyes narrowing slightly. "A situation with the venue," I repeated. Thomas hesitated, realizing he had just let something massive slip out of pure anxiety. He tried to backpedal, his voice tight with fear. "It is nothing we cannot handle," he stammered quickly. "It is just a slight misunderstanding with the botanical garden. Some kind of banking issue with the final deposits. Preston's father was supposed to wire the second half of the payment yesterday morning, but the garden management called me today, saying the funds never cleared. They are threatening to cancel the entire reservation if we do not provide a certified check by the end of the week. Your mother is terrified. We do not have that kind of liquid cash left, Kendra. We gave everything we had to the caterers and the band." I smiled a slow, sharp smile. Julian walked out onto the balcony and handed me a glass of wine, watching my expression change. My private investigator Marcus had been absolutely right. The Spencers were completely broke, and their fraudulent checks were finally bouncing all over Atlanta. The facade was cracking wide open, and my father was standing right in the impact zone, begging me to catch the falling debris. "That sounds like a terrible situation, Thomas," I said, my voice dripping with cold, false sympathy. "But like Preston said, his family has a certain reputation to uphold in the city. I am sure his elite country club friends will be more than happy to step in and cover the bounced checks for him." "Kendra, please," my father begged, the last shreds of his pride vanishing into the phone. "You have $10 million. $100,000 to secure the venue is absolute pocket change to you. If they cancel the botanical garden, Preston's family will be a laughingstock, and Chloe will never forgive us for ruining her perfect day. We will pay you back, I swear it." I took the last sip of my espresso, letting the bitter roasted taste settle on my tongue. "I guess Chloe is going to have to learn how to deal with disappointment," I said quietly. "Have a good night, Dad." I hung up the phone before he could utter another word and slid the device into the pocket of my silk robe. The shift in power was absolute and permanent. They were officially drowning, and the only lifeline they had left had just confidently walked away, leaving them to face the exact reality they had chosen. The morning after that phone call, the sun rose over Milan, painting the historic architecture in brilliant shades of gold and amber. I woke up feeling incredibly rested. There was no anxiety in my chest, and no lingering guilt about leaving my family to face the consequences of their own actions. I wrapped myself in a plush hotel robe and walked out into the main living area of our suite. Julian was already awake, sitting at the glass dining table with a cup of black coffee and his tablet propped up in front of him. He looked up as I entered, and a slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across his face. "You are going to want to see this," he said, tapping the screen and turning the tablet toward me. I walked over and looked down. Julian had pulled up the most popular high society gossip blog in Atlanta. It was a vicious, highly read digital publication that tracked the movements, the scandals, and the financial missteps of the Southern elite. The entire front page was dominated by a massive breaking news banner. Below it was a photograph of Preston and Chloe taken at a charity gala a few months ago. The headline was printed in bold, unforgiving letters. "Old money runs out. The Spencer family bounced checks, and the collapse of the wedding of the season." I pulled out a chair and sat down, reading the article with intense fascination. The blog post was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, though I suspected they had a little help behind the scenes. Julian took a sip of his coffee, his eyes dancing with quiet amusement. He had spent the last few years working at a top-tier corporate law firm, and his network of legal contacts in Atlanta was vast. While he would never violate professional ethics, he knew exactly which public records to point a hungry journalist toward. Someone anonymous had handed the blog a treasure trove of financial ruin, and the writer had published every single devastating detail. The article laid out the absolute insolvency of Preston's family for the entire city to see. It detailed the 3 separate mortgages on their Buckhead estate, the tax liens, and the fact that Preston's consulting job was a complete fabrication. But the most explosive part of the story was the section regarding the wedding venue. According to the blog, Preston's mother had made a fatal, unforced error the night before, panicking over the venue, demanding a certified check. She had taken to her private Facebook page to complain. She had posted a long, dramatic rant accusing the Atlanta Botanical Garden of being unreasonable, discriminatory, and hostile toward her family. She claimed the venue was trying to extort them over minor clerical errors and threatened to pull her high society guest list. She expected her wealthy friends to rally behind her. Instead, her post forced the public relations department of the Botanical Garden to defend their corporate reputation. The venue released a highly unusual but devastatingly polite public statement. The blog had embedded a screenshot of the official press release directly into the article. "We at the Atlanta Botanical Garden pride ourselves on hosting world-class events," the statement read. "However, we must clarify the situation regarding the Spencer wedding. We regret to inform the public that due to a series of returned payments totaling $50,000 and the failure to provide certified funds after multiple extensions, we have officially canceled the reservation. We wish the couple the best, but we cannot accommodate clients who are unable to fulfill basic contractual obligations." I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. It was a complete public execution. The illusion of Preston's wealth was shattering in real time. The blog comments were flooding in by the thousands. Members of the country club that had banned his family were confirming the rumors of their unpaid dues. Local vendors were leaving comments about unpaid catering bills and bounced deposits. The Spencer family had built their entire identity on looking down on others, and now the very people they had tried to impress were watching them fall from grace with absolute glee. I opened the social media application on my phone and searched for Chloe's profile. Just yesterday, she had been posting frantic videos outside the bridal boutique complaining about her massive budget. Today, her page was completely gone. She had deactivated all her social media accounts, hiding from the massive wave of public humiliation. The high society wedding she had used to mock my intimate gathering was now a spectacular public joke. My parents were now chained to a sinking ship. They had drained their retirement accounts to fund a lie. They had bragged to all their friends at church and in our neighborhood about the wealthy white aristocratic family their daughter was marrying into. They had turned their backs on their eldest daughter because they thought Preston was their ticket to elite status. Now everyone in Atlanta knew that Thomas and Brenda were nothing more than the desperate financiers for a family of broke con artists. "We have to go back to Atlanta," Julian said gently, breaking my train of thought. I looked up at him confused. Our flights to Tuscany were already booked for the next day. The villa was ready. The staff was prepared and my custom gown was safely packed in its garment bag. "I have no intention of going back there to clean up their mess, Julian," I said firmly. "We are not going back for them," he replied, reaching across the table to take my hand. "We are going back for you. The legal department emailed me an hour ago. The final corporate transition documents for your acquisition of the eco-resort need your physical signature in the presence of the board before the end of the fiscal quarter, and I need to physically clear my desk at the firm and sign my own partnership agreements before we leave for Europe permanently. We only need to be on the ground for 48 hours. We sign the papers, we finalize the business, and we fly straight to Tuscany." I nodded slowly. He was right. I was not going to let my family's chaotic meltdown interfere with my multi-million-dollar corporate expansion. My business required my attention, and I was not going to hide in Europe just because my parents were having a public crisis. We packed our vintage trunks and had the concierge arrange our transport to the airport. By early afternoon, we were boarding my company's private Gulfstream jet for the transatlantic flight back to Georgia. The flight was completely peaceful. We drank sparkling water, reviewed legal contracts, and finalized the seating chart for our Tuscan reception. I felt entirely removed from the drama waiting on the ground. My life was ordered successful and deeply fulfilling. I had built a fortress around my peace, and no amount of family panic could breach it. The jet touched down at the private aviation terminal in Atlanta just as the sun began to set, casting long, dark shadows across the tarmac. The captain unsealed the cabin door, and the warm, humid Georgia air rushed in. I gathered my purse, and Julian took my hand as we walked down the short steps onto the pavement. The private terminal was designed for absolute discretion. It was a quiet, luxurious building where high-net-worth individuals could bypass the chaos of the main commercial airport. I had instructed my executive assistant Maya to have my regular chauffeur waiting for us inside the lounge. We were supposed to walk through the glass doors, get right into the waiting town car, and drive directly to my penthouse. But as Julian and I walked through the automatic sliding doors into the quiet, carpeted lounge, the scene waiting for us was anything but discreet. Standing in the center of the room, blocking our path to the exit, were three figures. They looked completely out of place in the polished, serene environment of the private terminal. It was my mother Brenda, my father Thomas, and my sister Chloe. I stopped in my tracks, Julian immediately stepping slightly in front of me in a protective stance. I had no idea how they had managed to get past the security desk at the private lounge. Thomas must have used the last ounce of his remaining credit limit to bribe a gate agent, or perhaps he had simply badgered the staff until they let him wait inside. They looked absolutely terrible. The smug, arrogant confidence they had worn at the anniversary dinner was entirely gone. Thomas looked like he had aged 10 years in a single week. His posture was slumped, his clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. Brenda was clutching a leather handbag to her chest, her face pale and drawn, her usual immaculate makeup completely undone. But Chloe was the most shocking sight of all. The pastel aesthetic, the perfectly styled hair, and the manufactured influencer persona had completely evaporated. She was wearing oversized gray sweatpants and a dark hooded sweatshirt. Her face was bare, revealing deep dark circles under her eyes. She looked small, defeated, and incredibly desperate. They did not look like the family that had confidently told me I was cut off and dead to them. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck who had just spotted a rescue boat. When they saw me walk through the doors, Brenda let out a sharp, choked sob. She practically lunged forward, her hands outstretched, reaching for me as if I were her only hope for salvation. "Kendra," she cried, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet terminal. "Thank God you are here. You have to help us. Please, you have to save us." I took a step back, putting physical distance between myself and my mother's outstretched hands. Julian stood firm beside me, his presence a silent warning that they were not to cross any physical boundaries. I looked at the three of them standing in the pristine private aviation lounge, looking like absolute refugees from their own disastrous life choices. Brenda dropped her hands when she realized I was not going to embrace her. The desperate tears that had been welling in her eyes almost instantly evaporated, replaced by the familiar hardened edge of entitlement. She straightened her posture, attempting to pull her wrinkled jacket together to regain some semblance of authority. "Kendra, you need to listen to me," Brenda said, her voice dropping its pleading tone and returning to its usual demanding cadence. "We are in a state of absolute emergency. You saw the blogs. You saw what those vicious people are writing about us and about Preston's family. The botanical garden completely humiliated us. They canceled the reservation over a minor banking delay, and now the entire city is talking. Preston's mother is having a nervous breakdown, and his relatives are demanding to know where the wedding is going to be held." I stared at her, feeling a cold wave of absolute disbelief wash over me. "A minor banking delay?" I repeated, my tone flat. "You mean $50,000 in bounced checks?" Thomas stepped forward, waving his hand dismissively, as if a massive public financial scandal was just a tiny administrative error. "That is none of your concern, Kendra," he snapped, trying to assert a patriarchal dominance he no longer possessed. What matters right now is family. We are under attack. People are questioning our social standing. They are questioning Preston's pedigree. We cannot let these ridiculous rumors destroy Chloe's big day. We need to pivot and we need to do it immediately. I crossed my arms, waiting for the inevitable punchline. And how exactly do you plan to pivot, Thomas? Brenda took a deep breath, looking me dead in the eye. We need the keys to your villa, she stated. The sheer audacity of her demand hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She did not ask for a loan. She did not ask for my help finding a new local venue. She demanded the keys to my $10 million European estate. She continued talking, speaking rapidly, as if her insane logic made perfect sense. It is the only way to save the family from complete humiliation, Kendra. Preston's relatives need to see that we have international assets. They need to see that we operate on a global scale. If we move the wedding to Tuscany, it completely changes the narrative. People will not think the botanical garden canceled on us. They will think we canceled on them because we decided to upgrade to an exclusive European destination wedding. It is the perfect spin. I looked at Chloe, who had remained silent up until this point. She stepped out from behind our father, pushing her dark hood back. There was no apology in her eyes. There was no remorse for showing up to my penthouse demanding $45,000 or telling me I was dead to the family. She looked at me with the exact same spoiled expectation she had carried her entire life. You have to do this, Kendra. Chloe whined, her voice carrying that familiar grating pitch. My entire life is ruined right now. My friends are texting me asking if I am broke. Preston is furious. You hid all this money from us. If you had just told us you owned a villa in the first place, we could have planned for Italy from the very beginning and avoided all this local drama. You owe me this. You need to let us use your house and your staff, and obviously you will need to arrange the flights for Preston's immediate family since it is such short notice. I stood completely frozen in the center of the lounge. The silence stretched for a long, agonizing minute. I looked at my mother, who believed stealing my wedding venue was a perfectly reasonable solution to her own self-inflicted social crisis. I looked at my father, who was willing to let his eldest daughter be used as a human shield to protect a con artist. I looked at my sister, who genuinely believed that my multi-million-dollar empire existed solely to fund her pastel-colored delusions. They had not come to the airport to apologize. They had not come to make amends. They had come to strip my assets. They were standing in front of me demanding that I hand over the sacred, beautiful space I had spent years curating for my own marriage so they could use it as a prop to impress a family of broke fraudsters. They wanted to take my success and slap Preston's name on it. Julian tensed beside me, his jaw clenching. He leaned in close to my ear. Give me the word, and security will escort them out, he whispered. I took a slow, deep breath. My initial instinct was to laugh in their faces. My instinct was to tell them they were completely insane to turn around, walk into my waiting town car, and leave them standing in the private terminal with absolutely nothing. I wanted to tell them they were never going to see the inside of my villa, and that they could have their wedding in the parking lot of the botanical garden for all I cared. But as I looked at their desperate, greedy faces, a different thought began to form in my mind. If I walked away now, they would spend the rest of their lives playing the victims. They would spin a narrative that I was a cruel, vindictive billionaire who abandoned her family in their darkest hour. Chloe would cry to anyone who would listen, and Brenda would play the tragic martyr. They would never truly understand the magnitude of their own arrogance, because they would always have me to blame. They needed a lesson that could not be spun. They needed to experience the absolute peak of their own entitlement right before it was permanently ripped away from them on a stage they could not control. They wanted international assets. They wanted a global audience. I let out a soft breath, and the tension completely drained from my shoulders. A slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. I looked directly into my mother's eyes. You know what, Brenda? I said, my voice smooth and perfectly pleasant. You are absolutely right. The narrative does need to change. Moving the wedding to Tuscany would be the ultimate power move for the Spencer family. Brenda's eyes widened in shock. Thomas let out a loud gasp of relief, and Chloe actually clapped her hands together, a genuine squeal escaping her lips. Are you serious? Chloe gasped, stepping forward. You are actually going to let us use it? I am, I replied, nodding slowly. You can have your wedding at my villa. In fact, I will not even make you worry about the logistics. The venue is fully staffed, the catering is already paid for, and the floral arrangements are being flown in from Paris. Everything is perfectly arranged. All you have to do is show up. My father reached forward, grabbing my hand and shaking it vigorously. I knew you would come through, Kendra. He beamed, his arrogant confidence instantly returning. I knew you would remember what family is really about. This is going to save everything. Preston is going to be thrilled. I gently pulled my hand away from his grip, maintaining my pleasant smile. There is just one condition, I added. They all froze, waiting for the catch. My company's private jet leaves Atlanta for Milan on Tuesday evening, I said. I will reserve seats for the three of you and for Preston. You need to pack your bags and be on that aircraft before the doors close. Be on it or stay in Atlanta and figure out your own mess. Those are my terms. Brenda nodded frantically. Yes, of course, she agreed, her voice trembling with excitement. Tuesday evening. We will be there, Kendra. Thank you. We will tell Preston right now. I did not say another word. I turned around and walked toward the glass exit doors, Julian matching my pace. As we stepped out into the warm, humid night, the chauffeur opened the door to the town car. I slid into the back seat, staring straight ahead. Julian got in beside me, and the heavy door closed, shutting out the noise of the terminal. As the car pulled away from the curb, he turned to look at me, his dark eyes studying my face in the shadows. You just invited them to our wedding venue, he said, his voice laced with confusion and a hint of concern. Kendra, they are going to try to take over the entire estate. They are going to bring Preston and march in there like they own the place. I leaned my head back against the leather headrest, a dark, satisfying sense of anticipation settling deep into my bones. I know, I replied quietly. That is exactly what I want them to do. They think they just bullied me into submission. They think they have won the ultimate prize. I turned to look at Julian, my smile returning sharper and colder than before. They have absolutely no idea they are walking directly into a trap. And once they step foot on my property in Italy, there will be nowhere left for them to hide. The private jet flight from Atlanta to Milan on Tuesday evening was a masterclass in uncomfortable silence. Julian and I sat in the forward cabin reviewing our final wedding itineraries, while my parents, my sister, and Preston huddled in the rear seats. They drank my vintage champagne and ate the catered caviar, but they barely spoke a word to me. The sheer reality of my wealth was surrounding them at 30,000 feet, and it completely silenced their usual arrogant chatter. When we landed in Milan the following morning, the transition was seamless. We bypassed customs through a private diplomatic channel and immediately boarded two chartered helicopters waiting on the tarmac to take us directly to the estate. The view from the helicopter as we descended into the Tuscan Valley was breathtaking. The rolling green hills were covered in perfectly aligned vineyards and ancient silver olive groves. At the center of the sprawling property sat my villa. It was a massive, restored 16th-century stone palace with terracotta rooftops, a sparkling infinity pool carved into the cliffside, and manicured gardens that rivaled royal estates. When the helicopters touched down on the private helipad, my estate manager Marco and a line of uniformed staff were waiting to greet us with absolute professionalism. A few hours later, the rest of Preston's family arrived. Thomas had desperately drained the last available limit on his credit cards to fly Preston's parents and a handful of his snobbiest aunts and uncles over on commercial flights. A fleet of black luxury vehicles brought them up the winding driveway to the main courtyard. I stood on the upper terrace with Julian watching the scene unfold below. This was the exact moment the trap began to close. Preston stepped out of the first vehicle to greet his relatives, acting as if he had personally built the estate stone by stone. He threw his arms wide open, breathing in the crisp Italian air. "Welcome to Tuscany," he announced loudly, his voice echoing off the ancient courtyard walls. His parents stepped out of the vehicles, looking around with wide, greedy eyes. They were completely bankrupt, facing federal tax evasion charges back in Atlanta, but here they paraded around like European aristocracy. Preston's mother, a thin woman dripping in fake pearls, immediately began waving her hand at my professional staff. She snapped her fingers at a valet pointing at her heavy luggage and demanding he carry it carefully because it was designer. It was a cheap imitation, but my staff was trained to remain impeccably polite and accommodated her rude demands without a single complaint. Preston led his family through the grand arched entrance into the main foyer. I walked slowly down the marble staircase to observe them up close. They did not thank me. They did not even acknowledge my presence. Preston was too busy giving his uncles a grand tour. He gestured toward the vaulted ceilings featuring original Renaissance frescoes and the massive stone fireplace as if he had commissioned them himself. "It is quite a property," Preston bragged, sliding his hands into the pockets of his tailored trousers. Thomas and Brenda were generous enough to provide this little vacation home for Chloe and me. We figured the botanical garden was just too pedestrian for our tastes. We needed something with a bit more history. I am already talking to the groundskeeper about putting in a private golf green out back. We will probably summer here every year. I stood on the bottom step listening to a man with zero income claim ownership of my $10 million sanctuary. He was lying to his relatives to cover up his own financial ruin, using my assets to prop up his fake legacy. My father Thomas stood off to the side, sweating nervously in his suit, forcing a tight smile and nodding along with Preston's ridiculous claims. Brenda was busy trying to impress Preston's mother by pointing out the expensive imported rugs, completely ignoring the fact that she was a guest in a home she had absolutely no right to claim. My staff moved efficiently around them, offering trays of chilled Prosecco and fresh local fruit. Marco, my brilliant and fiercely loyal estate manager, approached Preston holding a silver tray with a selection of welcoming beverages. Preston did not even look at him. He simply reached out, grabbed a glass of Prosecco, and handed Marco his empty chewing gum wrapper. Marco maintained a perfectly neutral expression, placing the wrapper in his pocket and bowing slightly before walking away. The blatant disrespect made my blood boil, but I kept my face entirely impassive. I was going to let them dig their graves as deep as they possibly could. While Preston was busy holding court with his broke relatives, Chloe was already plotting her takeover of the interior. She had changed out of her travel sweatpants and into a flowing white sundress, clearly trying to embody the aesthetic of a wealthy Italian bride. She walked up to Marco, demanding to know the layout of the bedrooms and asserting her dominance over the man she viewed as just another servant. Marco spoke with a smooth, elegant Italian accent. "We have prepared the east wing for you and your guests, Miss Chloe," he explained, gesturing toward a beautifully arched hallway. The east wing features 6 luxury suites with private balconies overlooking the vineyards. Your luggage is currently being transferred there to ensure your complete comfort. Chloe frowned, crossing her arms over her chest. "The east wing," she repeated, her voice dripping with immediate disdain. "That sounds like where you put the regular guests or the overflow relatives. Where is the master suite? The master suite is located in the south wing, occupying the entire top floor." Marco replied, his tone perfectly polite, but incredibly firm. Chloe turned on her heel, completely ignoring Marco's guidance. "Well, that is obviously where I will be staying," she announced loudly enough for everyone in the foyer to hear. "I am the bride. I need the most space for my hair and makeup team. Plus, Preston and I need the best view for our morning photos. You can put my parents in the east wing." She marched toward the grand marble staircase that led to the south wing, her designer heels clicking sharply against the stone floor. She snapped her fingers at 2 of my porters who were holding her heavy leather suitcases. "Bring those up to the master suite immediately," she ordered, pointing a perfectly manicured finger up the stairs. And tell the housekeeping staff I want fresh white orchids on the nightstand, not the cheap local flowers, real imported orchids. If they do not have them, send someone into town right now to buy them. She began climbing the stairs, completely bypassing the luxury guest quarters I had generously provided. She actually believed she could simply walk into my home and claim the most intimate private space in the entire villa. She thought her status as the bride gave her absolute authority over my property, my staff, and my personal boundaries. She assumed I would just roll over and let her take whatever she wanted, just like our parents had forced me to do for my entire life. She made it exactly 5 steps up the staircase before a massive figure stepped out from the shadows of the upper landing, completely blocking her path. It was my head of private security, a towering ex-military man named David, who had been with my company for 6 years. He stood at the top of the stairs with his hands clasped firmly behind his back, his face set like a stone wall. Chloe stopped abruptly, her annoyed expression faltering as she looked up at the intimidating man blocking her way. She had just attempted to bypass my rules and march her luggage directly into my sanctuary. She had no idea that her entitled demands had just triggered the absolute end of her manufactured authority. David stood at the top of the marble staircase like a solid wall of granite. His broad shoulders completely filled the archway leading to the south wing, and his face remained entirely devoid of emotion. Chloe paused on the 5th step, her designer suitcase bumping awkwardly against her calves. She let out a sharp breath of indignation, expecting the large man to instantly step aside and apologize for being in her way. "Excuse me," Chloe snapped, waving her manicured hand in the air. "You are blocking the hallway. I need to get into the master suite right now so my hair and makeup team can set up their lighting equipment. Move, please." David did not flinch. He looked down at her with the polite but unyielding gaze of a professional who only answered to one person. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Miss Chloe," he said, his deep voice echoing slightly in the grand stairwell. "But the south wing is strictly off-limits to all guests. It is the private residence of the estate owner. Your accommodations have been fully prepared in the east wing." Chloe's face flushed a deep, angry red. She looked back down the stairs at the crowd of Preston's relatives who were watching the exchange with growing interest. She was losing face rapidly, and her spoiled instinct was to immediately throw a tantrum to regain control. "I do not care whose private residence it is," she yelled, her voice echoing sharply. "I am the bride. My wedding is the only reason we are all standing in this dusty old house. My parents are the hosts of this weekend, and they want me in that suite." I stepped out from the shadow of the lower archway, Julian right beside me. I looked up the staircase at my sister. The silence in the foyer was absolute. "No, Chloe, they do not," I said, my voice completely calm but carrying enough authority to cut through her hysterics. "And even if they did, it would not matter. You are a guest in my home. You will sleep in the room I have assigned to you, or David will personally escort you back to the helipad so you can find a hotel in town. The choice is entirely yours." Chloe opened her mouth to scream, but my father Thomas quickly rushed forward, grabbing her arm and pulling her back down the stairs. He shot me a terrified, warning look, desperate to keep the peace in front of Preston's aristocratic parents. "Come on," Chloe, Thomas muttered, sweating profusely. "The east wing is beautiful. Let us just get settled. We do not need to make a scene in front of our guests." Chloe yanked her arm away from our father, shooting me a look of pure venom before angrily dragging her suitcase toward the guest corridors. Preston's family exchanged quiet, judgmental whispers as they were escorted to their own rooms by my staff. The illusion of Preston's grand authority was already starting to crack, and he knew it. 2 hours later, the late afternoon sun began to dip below the Tuscan hills, casting a warm golden light across the stone courtyard. I had arranged for a casual welcome reception, allowing the guests to mingle near the infinity pool while enjoying local wines and light appetizers. I stood on the upper terrace watching the crowd below. Preston was pacing near the outdoor bar, his face tight with barely concealed rage. His ego had taken a massive hit during the staircase incident, and he was desperate to reassert his dominance over his relatives. He needed to prove that he was the man in charge, the wealthy heir who commanded respect. He marched up to one of my bartenders, a young Italian man named Luca, who was elegantly pouring glasses of vintage Prosecco. Preston slammed his hand down on the marble bar top. "Listen to me, buddy." Preston barked loudly enough for half the courtyard to turn and stare. "I am absolutely sick of this sparkling wine. I want bourbon. And do not bring me any of that cheap local garbage. I want your top-shelf imported Kentucky Reserve. Pour it neat and bring a tray of it over to my uncle's right now. We are celebrating." Luca maintained his professional composure, but he subtly glanced up toward the terrace where I was standing. My estate was stocked with some of the rarest liquors in the world, but they were kept in a locked private cellar strictly reserved for my corporate clients and personal use. They were not part of the standard wedding package I had so generously provided for free. I gave Luca a brief nod and walked back into my office. I pulled a heavy black leather folio from my desk, printed out an itemized authorization form, and clipped a silver pen to the paper. I walked down the stone steps and stepped out into the courtyard, the warm breeze catching the hem of my silk dress. The guests parted slightly as I walked directly toward the bar. Preston saw me coming and puffed out his chest, crossing his arms as if preparing for a battle he was absolutely certain he would win. "Is there a problem, Kendra?" he sneered loud enough for his parents to hear. "Your bartender seems a little confused by a simple request. I am just trying to show my family a good time in this little house of yours." "There is no problem at all, Preston," I replied, stopping just inches away from him. I held out the black leather folio, offering it to him with a perfectly polite smile. "Luca knows exactly where the private reserve is kept. However, since you are the groom and you are so graciously hosting your uncles today, I assumed you would want to personally cover the cost of the premium off-menu requests." Preston looked down at the folio, his arrogant smirk faltering slightly. "What is this?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. "It is a standard credit card authorization form." I explained, my voice loud and clear, carrying across the quiet courtyard. "The vintage bourbon you requested is valued at approximately $500 a pour. Since you are ordering a full tray for your family, I simply need your signature and a physical credit card to hold on file for the incidental tab. It is a very standard procedure for high society events. I am sure a man of your wealth understands." The blood completely drained from Preston's face. He stared at the silver pen as if it were a venomous snake. He knew exactly what I was doing. I knew he was entirely bankrupt. I knew the credit cards in his wallet were either maxed out or canceled. If he handed me a card, my staff would run it immediately, and it would inevitably decline loudly and publicly in front of his entire family. Preston's father, a man who was secretly dodging federal tax collectors, cleared his throat nervously and took a step back. Preston's mother looked at her son, waiting for him to confidently produce his legendary black card and put me in my place. Preston swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward Thomas, who was hiding behind a large potted olive tree, refusing to make eye contact. My father was tapped out. There was no one left to quietly bail Preston out. Actually, Preston stammered, his voice dropping an octave as he nervously adjusted his collar. "You know what? It is a little too early in the evening for heavy liquor. We should stick to the local wine. When in Rome, right? Cancel the bourbon request." I kept the folio extended, my smile never wavering. "Are you completely sure, Preston?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "I would hate for your guests to feel deprived. I can easily open a tab for you. All I need is a quick swipe." "I said cancel it," Preston hissed, stepping close to me so only I could hear the pure hatred in his voice. I slowly pulled the folio back, snapping it shut with a sharp, definitive click. "Right away, sir," I said, stepping back and gesturing smoothly to the bartender. "Luca, please continue serving the Prosecco. The groom has decided to stick to his budget." Someone in the crowd let out a low, quiet chuckle. Preston turned completely red, humiliated, and entirely emasculated in front of the very people he had spent his life trying to impress. He grabbed a glass of water and stormed off toward the gardens, his mother trailing behind him, demanding to know why he was letting me speak to him that way. I turned and walked back toward the villa, the heavy wooden doors closing smoothly behind me. The courtyard was buzzing with frantic whispered conversations. Preston's relatives were finally realizing that the ground beneath them was not nearly as solid as they had been led to believe. But the night was far from over. As I walked up to the master suite to begin getting dressed for the evening, I knew the real battle was just about to begin. Tensions had completely boiled over, and the rehearsal dinner was scheduled to take place in less than 2 hours. Preston and Chloe had been backed into a corner, and their humiliation had turned into a desperate, venomous rage. Through my security cameras, I could already see Preston's mother pulling Brenda into a quiet corner of the library, whispering frantically. They were planning something. They were organizing a hostile social takeover of the dinner, aiming to publicly reclaim their dominance and humiliate me in front of my own fiance and staff. They wanted a war, and as I slipped into my tailored evening gown, I was more than ready to give them one. The grand stone dining hall of the villa was a masterpiece of Renaissance architecture. The vaulted ceilings were painted with intricate historical frescoes, and a massive crystal chandelier cast a warm glowing light over the long mahogany table. My private culinary team had prepared a spectacular 5-course feast featuring roasted truffle risotto, dry-aged Florentine steak, and fresh local seafood. It was a meal designed for royalty. Preston and his relatives devoured the expensive food, with the frantic hidden desperation of people who had not seen a full bank account in a decade, all while maintaining their upturned noses and arrogant postures. I sat near the head of the table with Julian silently observing the grotesque display of fake wealth and forced politeness. My parents were seated directly across from Preston's parents. Brenda was leaning forward, laughing entirely too hard at every unamusing joke Preston's mother made. Thomas was sweating slightly inside his tuxedo collar, desperately trying to project the image of a wealthy patriarch. Chloe sat next to Preston, wearing a custom silk evening gown, practically vibrating with the need to be the center of attention. They were all playing their parts in a meticulously constructed play, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the one who owned the stage. As the dessert plates were cleared away by my impeccable staff, my father Thomas stood up. He picked up his crystal wine glass and tapped it lightly with a spoon, calling for the room's attention. The chatter died down, and all eyes turned toward him. Thomas cleared his throat, puffing out his chest. Family and friends, he began, his voice echoing off the stone walls. We are gathered here tonight in this beautiful country to celebrate the union of two incredible people. When Brenda and I first met Preston, we knew immediately that he was a man of exceptional caliber. He comes from a family of deep historical legacy and profound social standing. Thomas smiled warmly at Preston's parents, bowing his head slightly, in a sickening display of submission. We want to thank the Spencer family for welcoming our Chloe into their prestigious circle. You have elevated our family in ways we never thought possible. Preston, you are the son I always wanted. You bring class sophistication and true leadership to this family. We could not be more proud to stand behind you and support this magnificent wedding. The insult was glaring and entirely intentional. Thomas had just looked at a broke, unemployed fraud and called him the son he always wanted, while my brilliant, fiercely loyal fiancé sat right across from him. Julian did not even flinch. He simply took a slow sip of his wine, completely unbothered by the opinions of a man he knew was about to lose everything. Preston's relatives clapped politely, murmuring their arrogant approval. Chloe beamed, reaching out to hold Preston's hand as if they had just won a Nobel Prize. Thomas sat down, wiping his brow with a linen napkin. Preston immediately stood up to take the floor. He buttoned his suit jacket, flashing a perfectly practiced politician's smile. He raised his glass of local wine, the very same wine he had complained about hours earlier. "Thank you, Thomas," Preston said, his voice dripping with false humility. "I want to echo that sentiment. This has been a stressful few weeks, As you all know, we had to make a last-minute pivot from our original venue in Atlanta. Some people would have panicked, but the Spencer family does not panic. We simply elevate our standards. Preston began pacing slowly behind his chair, commanding the room with his delusional confidence. He looked directly at his broke uncles and his fraudulent parents, making sure they hung on his every word. When we realized the botanical gardens simply could not meet our requirements, Thomas and Brenda really stepped up to the plate. Preston continued lying through his teeth with breathtaking ease. They knew Chloe and I needed a venue that truly reflected our lifestyle, and they delivered beyond our wildest expectations. Preston extended his arms outward, gesturing to the grand dining hall, the vaulted ceilings, and the expensive artwork lining the walls. I am thrilled to officially announce to my family that Thomas and Brenda have generously purchased this magnificent $10 million estate as a wedding gift for Chloe and me, Preston declared, his voice booming with absolute triumph. A collective gasp echoed around the table from Preston's relatives. They immediately erupted into enthusiastic applause, cheering and raising their glasses. Preston's mother looked at Brenda with newfound respect, entirely fooled by the lie. Chloe blushed, looking down at her lap as if she were a modest princess accepting her rightful kingdom. Thomas and Brenda sat frozen in their chairs, the color completely drained from my mother's face. My father's eyes widened in sheer terror. They had wanted Preston to think they were wealthy, but they never anticipated he would publicly claim ownership of a property they did not own. They were trapped. If they corrected him now, they would instantly expose their own poverty and ruin the high society illusion they had sacrificed everything to build. So they did exactly what cowards always do. They stayed silent and nervously nodded along. Chloe and I are so incredibly grateful for this gift, Preston continued, basking in the applause of his family. We are already making plans to remodel the East Wing to better accommodate our guests. We look forward to hosting all of you here in Tuscany every single summer. This estate is officially the new foundation of the Spencer family legacy. He raised his glass high into the air. To family, to legacy, and to our new home, he toasted. To your new home, his relatives echoed enthusiastically, drinking their wine and cheering for a future that did not exist. Preston sat back down, looking incredibly smug. He shot a quick, arrogant glance in my direction, expecting me to shrink away in defeat. He truly believed he had won. He believed he had successfully intimidated my parents into silence and legally cornered me into surrendering my own property to save their reputation. He thought his lies were an impenetrable armor. I sat perfectly still. I did not feel anger. I felt the cold, precise click of a trap springing shut. They had reached the absolute peak of their delusion. Every single person in that room was fully committed to the lie. There was no more string left for them to pull. I turned my head slightly and locked eyes with Julian. He gave me a slow, barely perceptible nod. It was time. I reached forward and picked up my heavy silver dinner fork. I held my crystal wine glass in my left hand. I tapped the silver metal against the crystal. Ding, ding, ding. The sharp, high-pitched ringing cut through the loud, celebratory chatter of Preston's family. The laughter slowly died down. One by one, the guests turned their attention toward my end of the table. Preston looked incredibly annoyed that his moment was being interrupted. Chloe rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh. Thomas looked at me with pure, desperate panic, silently begging me not to say anything that would ruin the illusion. I pushed my chair back, letting the wooden legs scrape loudly against the stone floor. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored evening gown. I looked down the length of the long mahogany table, making deliberate eye contact with every single person in the room. I did not speak right away. Instead, I raised my hand and caught the eye of my head of security, David, who was standing perfectly still in the shadows by the grand entrance. I gave him a single sharp nod. David immediately stepped backward into the corridor. He grabbed the heavy iron handles of the massive wooden dining room doors and pulled them shut with a forceful, aggressive pull. The heavy metal deadbolts slid into place with a loud mechanical thud that echoed like a gunshot through the silent stone room. The secondary locks clicked sharply, sealing the grand dining hall entirely from the rest of the estate. Preston's mother let out a confused, nervous flutter of a laugh. "What is going on?" she asked, looking around at the locked doors. Preston stood up, his chair falling backward onto the floor. "Kendra? What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice losing its confident bravado and cracking with sudden fear. "Open those doors right now." I placed my hands flat on the polished mahogany table, leaning forward into the warm candlelight. I looked directly at the man who had just tried to steal my empire. "Nobody is leaving this room, Preston," I said, my voice low, cold, and echoing with absolute authority. "We are going to have a real conversation about family legacy and exactly who owns what. And by the time I am finished speaking, you will all wish the botanical garden was the worst thing that ever happened to you." I reached into the pocket of my evening gown and pulled out a small, sleek silver remote control. I pointed it toward the back of the room and pressed a single button. A low, mechanical hum resonated through the dining hall as a massive high-definition projection screen slowly descended from the vaulted ceiling, completely covering the grand stone fireplace. The lights in the dining hall automatically dimmed, casting the entire room into a sharp, dramatic shadow. I pressed another button, and the projector mounted on the opposite wall flickered to life. A brilliantly bright image appeared on the screen, towering 10 feet tall for everyone to see. It was a highly detailed scanned copy of a legal document. "I want to talk about this generous wedding gift Preston just mentioned," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "What you are looking at on this screen is the official deed to my parents' house in Atlanta. If you look closely at the highlighted section near the bottom, you will notice a second mortgage was taken out against the property just 4 days ago. My father, Thomas, liquidated his entire retirement portfolio and leveraged the only piece of real estate he owned to generate $200,000 in emergency cash." Thomas sank down into his chair, his face buried in his hands. Brenda stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing silently, unable to formulate a single word of defense. "Now, why would a family need to secure that much emergency cash weeks before a wedding?" I asked, pacing slowly behind my chair. "The answer is simple. They needed it to cover a massive trail of fraudulent debts." I clicked the remote again. The image on the screen changed. The new document was a federal court filing stamped with a red official seal. It was the Chapter 7 bankruptcy petition for the Spencer family. Preston's mother let out a shrill, terrified shriek and covered her face with her linen napkin. The arrogant relatives who had just been cheering and raising their glasses suddenly froze, their expressions twisting into absolute horror. "This is the true legacy of the Spencer family," I announced, gesturing toward the screen. "They do not have a massive trust fund. They do not have generational wealth. They have 3 defaulted mortgages on a house they are about to lose. They have massive tax liens and unpaid country club dues. They used my parents' desperate need for social validation to trick them into paying for a high society wedding they could never afford themselves. My parents drained everything they had to buy ice sculptures and caviar for a family of broke con artists." "That is a complete lie," Preston shouted, his voice cracking as he slammed his hands on the table. "You are forging these documents, Kendra. My family has assets. We have offshore accounts. You are just a bitter, jealous woman trying to ruin my wedding because you cannot stand that Chloe is marrying into a better family than yours." I did not raise my voice. I simply smiled a cold, unforgiving smile and clicked the remote one final time. The screen shifted, displaying a complex corporate acquisition portfolio. It showed the transfer of the Spencer family debt from their original banking institutions to a private equity firm. "You do have assets, Preston," I agreed calmly. "Or rather, you did. Your parents defaulted on all their loans. The bank auctioned off those debts last month to a private equity firm to recoup their losses. But what you did not bother to research was the parent company of that private equity firm." I zoomed in on the document, highlighting the signature block at the very bottom of the page. My name was printed in bold black letters directly beneath the title of Chief Executive Officer. The firm that bought your defaulted loans is a subsidiary of my global hospitality group, I explained, watching the absolute devastation wash over Preston's pale face. I own your debt. I own the remaining equity on your heavily mortgaged estate. You do not own a summer home, Preston. In fact, your parents owe me rent. The dining hall erupted into pure chaos. Preston's uncles began shouting at his father, demanding to know if the bankruptcy was true. His mother was sobbing hysterically into her hands. But the loudest reaction came from my sister. Chloe stood up, her chair crashing to the floor. She turned toward Thomas and Brenda, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and absolute panic. "You lied to me!" she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the stone walls. "You told me he was rich. You told me I was marrying into high society. You made me brag to all my friends about his money, and now you are telling me you are broke and he is a fraud. You ruined my life." Brenda reached out, trying to grab Chloe's hand, her own tears streaming down her face. "Chloe, please, we did not know," she sobbed frantically. "We were just trying to give you the perfect day. We wanted you to have the best. Kendra is doing this to hurt us." Chloe yanked her hand away, looking at our mother with pure disgust. "You are pathetic," she spat. "I am not marrying a broke loser who lives off his parents. Bounce checks. The wedding is off." Preston lunged forward, grabbing Chloe's arm. His polite facade completely shattered, revealing the desperate, angry man underneath. "You are not going anywhere," he snarled. "We had a deal." David, my head of security, was across the room in a fraction of a second. He gripped Preston's shoulder with massive force, pulling him away from Chloe and pinning his arm securely behind his back. Preston let out a loud yelp of pain, completely immobilized by the larger man. Thomas fell to his knees on the stone floor, looking up at me with sheer terror. "Kendra, please," he begged the arrogant patriarch, completely broken. "We have nothing left. I signed away the house. I gave them everything. You have to fix this. You have the money to make this go away. You are our daughter. Please save us." I looked down at the man who had watched my sister humiliate me my entire life. I looked at the mother who had stolen my bridal appointment and told me I was not glamorous enough. I looked at the sister who had demanded my money and told me I was dead to the family. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a thick stack of printed paper. I tossed it onto the mahogany table. The papers fanned out, revealing multiple economy-class airline tickets. "Those are your return tickets to Atlanta," I said, my voice devoid of any pity or warmth. "They are economy class with 2 layovers. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your bags and vacate my property." Brenda gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "You cannot throw us out into the night," she cried. "We are in a foreign country. We have nowhere to go." "Your hour starts right now," I replied, turning my back on them. The chaos escalated as Preston's relatives refused to move, demanding that I provide luxury transportation back to the airport. They yelled and threatened lawsuits, completely forgetting that they were trespassing on foreign private property. I did not argue with them. I simply gave David a second nod. David pulled a 2-way radio from his belt and spoke a few rapid words in Italian. A moment later, the heavy oak doors of the dining hall were unlocked and pushed open from the outside. 6 uniformed Italian carabinieri officers marched into the room, their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. The flashing blue lights of their police cruisers reflected brightly against the ancient stone walls of the courtyard outside. The local police had zero tolerance for unruly tourists causing disturbances at high-value private estates. The officers began barking orders in stern Italian, physically directing the screaming, humiliated guests toward the exit. The Spencer family tried to argue, but the carabinieri simply grabbed their arms and escorted them forcefully out the door. I stood on the terrace with Julian, watching the spectacular finale unfold. My staff efficiently dragged their designer luggage out of the guest wings, piling it haphazardly at the end of the long gravel driveway. The police escorted my parents, my sister, and the entire Spencer family out the main gates, locking the heavy iron bars behind them. They were left stranded on a dark dirt road in the Tuscan countryside, surrounded by their suitcases, waiting for a cheap economy bus to take them to a budget airport hotel. The elite high society wedding of the season had ended in a police escort and total, absolute ruin. The next morning, the Tuscan sun rose over the valley, burning away the cool night air and washing the estate in brilliant, flawless light. The oppressive, toxic energy that had plagued my family for decades was completely gone. The air felt incredibly light and pure. Julian and I were married in the late afternoon, standing under an arch of imported white orchids overlooking the sprawling vineyards. There was no screaming, no demands for money, and no arrogant posturing. We were surrounded entirely by people who genuinely loved and respected us. My brilliant colleagues, my loyal friends, and the dedicated staff who had helped me build my empire stood by our sides and celebrated our union with authentic joy. As the sun began to set, casting vibrant streaks of purple and gold across the Italian sky, I walked out onto the private balcony of the master suite. I held a crystal glass of my own vintage wine, listening to the soft sounds of the string quartet playing in the courtyard below. I looked out over the $10 million estate that I had built with my own hands. My parents had chosen the wrong daughter to protect. They had chosen the wrong man to worship, and they had chosen the wrong wedding to prioritize. They had sacrificed their entire future for a lie. I took a sip of the rich, dark wine, a profound sense of peace settling permanently into my soul. I had chosen myself, and in the end, I had won absolutely everything. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire ordeal is that your worth is never defined by the people who refuse to see it, even if those people are your own family. Blood relation is not a free pass for lifelong disrespect. For years, I believed that if I just worked harder or achieved more, they would finally value me. But true family is built on mutual respect, not conditional exploitation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to win a rigged game. Walk away, protect your peace, and proudly build your own beautiful life. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family dynamic to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below, and please subscribe for more journeys of resilience.